now moving to our final session for today, a panel discussion on Bridge curriculum, where we will discuss the implementation, impact, and learnings from the Bridge curriculum. To facilitate the panel, we have with us Gayatri Kulkarni, Regional Training Lead at Teach for India. Joining her in this panel, we have 4 Teach for India Fellows, Riddhi Samarth, Mekhila Uchil, Shreya Singhal, and Aparna Sanjay. Welcome everyone. Over to you, Gayatri, to start the panel.
Thank you so much, Anu. And it's so exciting to see all the learning that is being generated today. It's an incredibly important theme that we're also exploring. So I'm looking forward to learning from these 4 amazing teachers on the call over the next half an hour or so. Before we just hand it over to hear from all of you, what I'm going to do is take the next 5 minutes or so and walk our audience through what Teach for India's Bridge curriculum actually intended to achieve and what were some design principles we kept in mind, right? So to everybody who's watching, we know you've been exploring the idea of just the learning loss that our children have faced over the pandemic. You've been talking about what kinds of learning loss also happened, and it was not just academic. What are some skills that attritioned due to the 2 years of school closures? So you've been exploring that. Stay with those thoughts as I'm going to quickly share my screen. And we will go over just 3 big things in the next half. Why did we implement the Bridge curriculum? I will build off of everything that you've all already explored over the last couple of hours. What were the principles that we used while designing this curriculum? And then these 4 beautiful teachers on the call are going to help us decode just our learning from that implementation, right? What were some of the strengths that we built through it? What were some challenges that we faced? What was the impact of it? And just how are we envisioning the way forward with any sort of Bridge curriculum or accelerated learning curriculum? We'll start off with the first 2. That's my role as a moderator here today. And then a majority of the time we will spend hearing from our teachers who actually used this curriculum in their classrooms. Quickly then, this is something that we've seen over the last 2 years, right? Because of the pandemic, because of 60+ weeks of just disrupted school learning, and this number varies for different regions in our country, but India was still among one of those countries that faced the longest durations of school closures across the globe. What that meant for us was also that students who were not learning all year, and this is just 1 year if we're considering of learning loss, in order for them to catch up with their original sort of academic trajectory, it would take up until 2030. And this is with the assumption that we go back 100% to the way we were pre-pandemic, right? Which we're currently seeing that that's not happening, right? It's really challenging to go back to exactly how things were in terms of the learning hours, the quality of learning, in terms of the aids that our children are able to access day in, day out, which is where your accelerated learning and bridge curricula come in, right? So even with the 20% accelerated learning curriculum, grades 3 to 6 would sort of, that time that they need to catch up with their original academic trajectory would have been reduced by 3 years. So I think just pausing here to share that the purpose of building a bridge curriculum and implementing it was incredibly clear to us, stepping into the pandemic and just the blended learning world. But what we also did, and the team at Teach for India that actually designed this curriculum spent a bit of time exploring in the past, whenever children have faced learning losses, what has actually worked in getting them back on there. And 3 principles came out across all effective bridge curricula. And I want everybody to just anchor the rest of the half an hour in this, which is 1, that this curriculum needs to prioritize and reduce content. The idea is not to say, let's do everything that we've missed out on. We will not compromise on anything. We'll just do it really fast. That's not something that works, right? So the idea is to prioritize and do and focus on only those skills, knowledge, mindsets that actually children need to move forward into the next grades. Yeah. Second was just increasing learning time. So no matter what in a blended way, asynchronous, synchronous, whatever way possible, can we optimize every single learning minute that our children actually can access once schools reopen or even in small groups, right? And that brings me to the third one. This is a really important principle, which is just small group instruction. Our children are currently at a place where the more focused and one-on-one attention they receive, the better and faster they are able to learn, right? So that is one of the principles that we tried to integrate into the design itself, where we said, hey, here are parts of the curriculum that you can just delegate to volunteers. Here are parts of the curriculum that you can just hand over to student leaders in your classroom who can walk others through it, right? So that was the idea. The first two principles we will talk about through the curriculum itself. And the second one, Teach for India actually implemented a volunteer program where we got in a lot more hands on deck. So every classroom had not just one teacher, but additional people to look out for them to facilitate learning for different buckets. Lastly, here's what the curriculum looked like. And this is a broad overview. There were 3 parts of the bridge curriculum. The first one was just social-emotional learning. I know you've already all discussed and gone over a little bit of just why it was important to cater to well-being, student well-being throughout the couple of years, but that's a resource bank that we actually provided to our fellows. For the language curriculum, we actually created 3 sets, and set A, B, C denote actually different reading levels. So based on readiness that our children had, that our readers in different classrooms had, we encouraged our fellows to use different sets. So our most struggling readers were using set A, whereas our slightly more ready readers were using set C. That was the progression. Lastly, under mathematics also, we had 3 sort of sets, and we had partnered with an external organization to outsource this. And we had grade 2, 4, and 7 curricula. What that meant was we had domain-wise activities and tasks assigned to this. And based on how much skills have attrition for a particular learner in terms of math, we encouraged fellows to map instruction. Lastly, I'm going to go over some choices that we made, and then I'm going to ask questions, a primary question to the rest of you. So folks, handing it over to you in a minute. But 4 big things that we did to make sure that bridge was something that was definitely efficient and effective towards student outcomes and learning in the pandemic was 1, diagnosing and prioritizing skills. Yeah, tied to one of our first principles. We didn't say we would do everything. Under a literacy, for example, if there is a particular question type our students are struggling with, then we only focused on repeatedly actually practicing that through our curriculum. Second one was instruction at the right level. So we did not say all teachers in grade 4 pick up set A or pick up grade 4 curriculum. We said, hey, identify students in your classrooms who actually need one kind of instruction, and then go according to that. So our bridge curriculum was designed to actually do differentiation in the classroom. Third was just leveraging every minute of the week. We also tried to sort of train our fellows on how do we plan for a week when it comes to such a complex type of differentiation, even with operations of it, right? And lastly, just leveraging volunteers and other stakeholders. We very consciously went into this knowing it's not just up to the teacher alone to sort of navigate the whole complexity. Those were some choices that we made. We're now going to get into the most important part, which is hearing from all of you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to request you all to just share with our audience here. How are you looking back now at the year? What would you say has been one of the biggest learning in terms of just implementing this bridge curriculum? Implementing, if we sort of move away from the specifics, implementing any sort of accelerated learning program. What has been your learning? And second, what has been the impact of it for your children, right? You know the gaps that they came in with. Where are they now is what I'd love to know. And Aparna, I'm going to invite you first. What I'd love for you to share with the group is also just, you teach a grade 2 classroom. So what kind of gaps were you seeing? And how did the principle of just small group instruction actually play out in your classroom? We'd love to hear from you in terms of that.
Hi, Gayatri. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on board. So to begin with, the first question that you spoke about was, sorry, what were some of the biggest learnings looking back at the year from implementing a curriculum like this? I think it's tied to what you brought up about small group learning. I think the effectiveness of small group learning and in differentiated groups, which fundamental to the principle of bridge, meeting the students where they're at, has been the biggest learning for me. Having an open access curriculum where I did not have to compromise the high rigor students from just reaching grade level and pushing them further, while also catering to students who are struggling with the very basics, I think has been what I would see as the biggest impact and my biggest learning from where we started. So like you said, I teach a grade 2 class. So effectively, a lot of my students, this was the first time they were in a formal learning space, right? From coming to a class and learning, like the first few lessons were just like, A, B, C's, to getting to a place in terms of impact where I would say we have almost 85% of the class are at grade level, are reading at their grade level right now. And we have a few students who are reading at grade 4 level and grade 3 level, where that is where I think the impact in literacy would lie. In terms of math, I think being able to cater to them based on the kind of learners they are. So where you have visual learners and auditory learners and verbal learners, creating material for them separately is also something I've seen from the bridge curriculum. Seeing the different types of worksheets and basing my means of assessing the very same objective or skill that we are trying to sort of instruct or imbibe in the children, using these different means that cater to their type of learning, I think has been something that I've really learned from and has caused impact in our classroom. Now, when I talk about small group learning, I think especially with my lowest trigger bucket, blended learning really came in for this particular aspect, because like you said, we had to maximize learning time. And from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, the students were in school and they were part of the exact same classroom, even though we tried to do a little bit of differentiation as far as possible. But leveraging volunteers post that in situations, let's say like 4 to 5 in the evening, or maybe 45-minute 2-hour classes or 2 classes a week, for example, and planning them in a way that would lead to more outputs in the class. So for example, if I have to give you a very simple example of how this worked, when my lowest trigger bucket had a class with their volunteer, we would try to approach it in the way that you leverage the methods that they're familiar with to teach them a new skill, right? And for example, it would be, I'm showing them a picture and I'm saying, describe this picture, right? With the volunteer. So we start with describing the picture, and in the process, we pick up new words, which will eventually be part of the lesson or the story we'll be reading in the next 2 days. So they are coming in prepped, not even though they didn't know the word or know how to read it, they're coming in prepped with how to tackle that story because they're familiar with these words. In this, another aspect that helped was mapping volunteers accordingly in very small groups. So I am somebody who started leveraging volunteers very late into my first year, and that is something I really want to do in my second year, is to map and mapping them in a way that really met student needs. Meetings like pushing student learning and meeting the child where they're at also requires us to cater our learning experience in a way that meets their needs. And one thing I really did here was language. I had Tamil speaking volunteers mapped to students who spoke Tamil at home. And what that meant was that these students did not have to learn to comprehend a new language in a new language. They learned English through Tamil. And I think that was something that turned out extremely effective for our classroom as well. So I think that's briefly, I hope I've touched upon everything you asked me to.
Absolutely did. Thank you so much for sharing that, Aparna. So what I'm hearing is just a very nuanced understanding of who is learning at what level and what are some strengths that are available in my ecosystem right now, whether it is my volunteers, whether it is me, whether it is my children. How am I leveraging that to sort of maximize learning? That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Riddhi, I'm going to also ask you to step in here. And I know you're on the other end of the spectrum. You teach grade 8. So your students sort of came in with very different kinds of gaps, right? There is also that added pressure of syllabus completion and coverage that was there, which you were running with from the very beginning. So if I were to ask you, how did you actually navigate differentiation, and how did you involve your students in actually making decisions about what they want to learn and how to spend time in a way that it's getting maximized? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely listening to Aparna because her experience was so different from mine with the same curriculum exactly. So as you said, I teach 8th grade, and then when I joined the class at the beginning of this academic year, a lot of my kids were at an RC level of like 1 or 1.5, which basically means they were reading at grade 3, grade 4 level, right? And the reality is, as a teacher, it's terrifying, right? You know what is in store for them in the 9th and 10th grade. It's overwhelming for students as well, because by the time they're in the 8th grade, they have that level of self-awareness to know I am not ready. I'm not where I'm supposed to be right now, right? They're seeing their peers, they're seeing what is coming for them. And so there can be that sense of, there's no point in trying, right? I'm never going to be able to cover up this kind of immense gap that has happened in my learning. So like when I reflect on how bridge curriculum played a role in our classroom, I think the biggest thing that it did was shift this mindset, right? It showed the children this very clear pathway that literacy can be broken down into these few structured like components. If you follow it, if you do your RC, if you do vocab, if you do grammar writing every single week, you can get there, right? There is a way for you to cover up that learning loss that has happened. So I think, yeah, in terms of impact, that's something that played a very big role with my kids. Also, working with 8th grade was a little bit different in this sense, because as you said, they were doing the same curriculum that, for instance, Aparna's kids were doing, right? And it can get challenging for a child to be developmentally much further ahead than what their reading level is. So I think something that helped a lot in that sense was just partnering with students, talking to them, explaining the curriculum to them. I still remember this one online class I had where I screen shared the entire bridge curriculum with them. I walked them through the different structures. I showed them, they asked me questions on why is this here, what does this do? And it just made the whole process a lot more transparent, right? It showed them that there is a purpose to what we are doing. There is an end goal in mind. And what it also allowed them to do is just exercise that extra bit of agency and say, you know what, this part of the curriculum is not necessary for me. As a teacher, I wanted to do every single thing for them, but it's not what they needed, right? There were some children who were very good with reading fluency. They just needed help with writing and framing answers. So giving them that extra bit of voice and saying, you tell me out of this curriculum, out of this entire rich resource, what is it that you really need in order to move ahead, right? So I think that's something that really helped our classroom, because it showed them that the bridge curriculum is not about moving them that 0.5 level ahead. It's not about that. It's about accelerating their learning to a point where they are taking control, right? They are taking control of what is missing right now in their learning and what they actually need in order to be ready for further grades. So I think that's something that worked for our class.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Riddhi. I think something that gets largely missed in this conversation of learning loss and a voice that is not usually heard is of our students, right? I think a lot of us we listen to experts, we listen to just curriculum designers, trainers like myself talk about, hey, here's what needs to happen. But I really love the way you also brought in just voice and agency to say, actually, the primary stakeholders have the most amount of control here. And that's what we are envisioning for our students as well. That was beautiful. Moving on to a little bit of just what we learned as teachers and the skills that we built, along with the skills that our students built. So Shreya, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about just your classroom. I want to hear two things. I'd love for you to share just, you have a classroom of 126 students. And so just you made a choice there to not differentiate, but to actually do homogeneous instruction, right? So what was the impact of that and what are you seeing play out in your classroom now, a year down the line? Along with that, just a little bit of what were some skills that you built as a teacher and your students have built over the year of using bridge curriculum, which they otherwise would not have if you just envision a normal regular year without bridge. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was lovely to hear from everyone. And coming to your question, Gayatri. So yes, I teach 126 grade 7 children. I teach literacy and social. So just to give a little more background, I have children who are able to confidently read and comprehend a grade 8 or even 9 text to children who are not able to make complete sense of a grade 1 text also. So with that in mind, the kind of impact I think bridge has done. So for me, when I started with bridge curriculum itself, given the classroom, I have two classrooms that are divided into two sections. So we do not have more place to have a separate section or to change the classrooms into more homogeneous grouping for the two sections itself. So in each of these two sections, there are kids with the varied learning levels, reading levels that I spoke about. So given that, I was not able to give, I could have given set B to children who are able to read a grade level text, but I was not able to do that. For me personally, it was difficult to manage a huge class. And although there were volunteers assigned, but their contribution would come in later. Like they would not be able to come to the class, take physical classes with the children itself. And I do have volunteers now, but not able to obviously sit in the entire class and teach as a fellow would do. So what did help rather is that I chose like a set B, the middle rigor paper for all the children, and I've had a heterogeneous setup in a class where a child who's not able to read properly, like a child who can read up grade level 1 or 2 text, is sitting with a child who can read grade 7 text. So they're all sitting in these heterogeneous groups. They're all helping each other. So I really saw collaboration come alive over the last few months beautifully, where a child who is weak, I mean, children, they are very aware of their own learning levels. They're aware that a child is able to read better than them. And they're not shy to ask, which is something I've realized. I mean, they're a little shy, of course, there'll be small disruptions here and there, but from that collaboration, they've helped each other. They've built that skill of reading and comprehending. The other skill, which is something that they've thankfully built over the last few months, is just annotating and making their reading and comprehension alive. So the annotations, when I talk about annotations, annotating for a character whenever they see a person or a character in a story, character feelings, for character actions, for making connections. All these things, they've internalized it so well that now if I teach a social lesson also, they're able to remember those skills and they're just doing that. The biggest achievement, like the biggest impact, I would say, is where very recently I'm able to see my low rigor kids also doing these particular annotations really, really well. So that is the kind of skills they have built, and that this is something they'll carry forward in every lesson of theirs. I'm reading a text, I keep forgetting, okay, I have to annotate for a character, but there are children who are pointing out, Didi, there's a character. So that's the kind of skills they have caught up and the impact we've created through Bridge. Thank you so much. I hope that answers both your questions. Thank you.
Absolutely does. Thank you for sharing that. I think what I'm just hearing from you is the transferability of it, right? There was a lag because of the learning loss that we faced, where our children were they took that time to pick up those skills again, because there was that attrition, there was sort of loss, right? That's the word we've been using. But I love that we're pointing now towards a sort of learning or method where we're saying, hey, it takes time. Once they pick that up, they're actually able to do it across, be that content, be that just rigor of topics that they're looking at. And what that means, what that implies for them is that now their learning will be much faster, right? And that's the whole idea of bridging or accelerating learning. So thank you for sharing that. Meghla, I'm gonna head on over to you and actually ask you to share, as a teacher, what were some things that you actually saw yourself doing and growing with? And how did you sort of contextualize the curriculum? Because a lot of times what happens is when ready curricula or resources come in to a teacher's hands, it's really easy to sort of get disoriented by the mismatch, right? So sometimes the curriculum wants you to do some things and you are really not seeing that happening or playing out in your classroom. So as a teacher, how did you make those decisions is what I'd love to know. Yeah.
Thank you, Gayatri, for that question. Yeah, I'll just go on. I think I'll start off by just mentioning some things that I learned, and then, yeah, move on to the next question. So with the curriculum, considering context, my class had some requirements for Hindi and Marathi, since they were compulsory subjects. So those teachers also had their particular timings that had to be taken by those teachers. There was also state curriculum that had to be completed for the unit tests and the terminal exams. So it wasn't easy to just implement a curriculum. There was, along with contextualizing that curriculum itself for my kids to make it more easier for them to understand, I think it was also very important to incorporate so many other factors into that curriculum for my kids, right? Again, everyone's contexts are so different. So just getting into the curriculum and changing it as much as I can to suit the needs of my kids, right? So I think in that sense, what I learned as a teacher is to take the curriculum and to contextualize it. To contextualize it as much as I can and make it ready and easy to use for each of my kids. The thing is, I have 3 buckets in my class. I have my low and rigor budget, my middle, and my high. So within those also, I have buckets of kids, like Aparna mentioned, the kids who have different needs and different ways of learning. So how do I cater to each of my kids with just one curriculum and one framework, right? So what I learned as a teacher was to plan, incorporate my vision document, the bridge curriculum, to make it a lot more holistic. I think that is something I have learned over this year, to bring about a lot of elements like SVS also into this, to bring in, one thing that really, something that I do a lot is like tweak the plan to work for my unit, because most of the texts that are there in the curriculum sometimes don't align with what I want to actually teach my kids in that week or that month. And it's probably not something I want to touch right now, but maybe next month. So this just how to adjust and adapt and be flexible with that, in that sense. So to just sit with the entire curriculum and to compartmentalize each bit. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Meghla. What I'm hearing is just like, as a teacher, my decision making and judgment actually is getting much, much stronger. And I'm able to say, prioritize, I'm able to map different pieces of the curriculum and resources that are available to me with different needs that I have in my classroom. And I saw you doing a much more nuanced way of differentiation than most teachers, right? Which is not just readiness, but also like styles of learning or interests that my students have. So further dividing it into that and catering through content. I think what I would love to sort of segue into, and as we're closing, we're coming to the last few minutes of our discussion, right? Something that we know now is that switching to online and offline is going to be a permanent sort of part of our lives as educators and as students over the next few years, right? And so bridging gaps is going to also be a constant, and it's going to be one of the most key skills that any teacher builds, that any curriculum designer also works towards in the coming years, and which was not the case before, right? So it's new for all of us. Accelerated learning curricula are new for all of us. So if I were to ask each one of you to take turns and actually just share, if you were to share any non-negotiables or absolutely key things to keep in mind for either a teacher, for school leaders who want to implement sort of bridge programs in their schools, for trainers of educators, for managers, for people who are working just in making school infrastructure better through the pandemic, what would you tell them about bridge programs, and what would you ask them to keep in mind as they're sort of walking into next year? Yeah. So whoever wants to start can actually go for it, and then we'll take turns, close out.
Can I go ahead? Yeah. All right, thank you. So I think one non-negotiable with regard to bridge curriculum would be the content itself. It's levelized to suit the reading level of the child. So that's very, very important, because that's the whole idea of like the bridge curriculum itself. And I have really seen that work wonders in my class. So a child who is I'll give a few examples. There are children, my lower girl children, they are obviously low on confidence. They know that they're not able to read the text. They're always going to depend on the higher girl kids. But when I give them a text that they can read, that they can make sense of, I can see pure joy in their faces, and I can see their desire to learn, their willingness to learn increase with that. And they're automatically going to stay focused on the lesson. They also have that confidence, small confidence build is what they're getting from that text itself. So levelized text is a non-negotiable.
Amazing. So just teaching at the level of where our students are. Yes, challenging them is important, but like that early success, if we're able to show them that early success, then we have sort of that investment and that buy-in into the curriculum itself. Beautiful. Thank you, Shreya. Riddhi, do you want to go next?
Sure. I agree. I mean, I think what Shreya said is really like the foundation of what Bridge works on. So I think that's a very important first. But I would also say that the curriculum should always have room for the teacher and the classroom together to experiment with it, right? To alter it, modify it, adapt it to whatever suits their needs at the moment. So I think also when you are given a resource, knowing that it is up to you, right, to make of it whatever is going to work magic in your classroom. I think that's something that's again a non-negotiable. I think there are a lot of great resources out there, but knowing which resource to apply to which student, in what manner, at what time, right? I think that's where that real impact starts to happen. So I would say that.
Thanks, Riddhi and Shreya. If I can go now, I'll try to keep this very brief, but I think three very important things, I think, when you think about bridge learning. One, I think for sure, small group learning. The effectiveness of having small groups discuss, learn from each other, be it heterogeneous or homogeneous, depending on the need of the time. Small group learning, I think, is something very fundamental. Secondly, I think understanding that at the end of the day, an accelerated learning curriculum focuses on skill building. So that allows you to also not compromise on syllabus completion to some extent. I understand it's not a blanket situation, but picking out skills that you want the children to learn and trying to match it to your syllabus requirements is something I think is very fundamental to bridge learning, given the other sort of constraints that we function under as teachers in a working with a particular board. And thirdly, I would say not compromising on SEL. I think Bridge SEL is something, socio-emotional learning is something I have really leveraged in my classroom, because it's not enough for us to do effective learning. It's also important for us to create a conducive learning environment for this learning to come to fruition and to have outcomes. So I think these are the three things that I think are fundamental to bridge learning, which I would definitely want everyone, including myself, to keep in mind all the time. Thank you. Over to you, Meghla.
Gayatri, it's okay if it's time up. All right. So I had a point very related to Aparna, but I'll just go with another, which is a balanced literacy week or balanced literacy. I feel like all the elements of literacy are very important in the child's life when they are bridging a gap or even otherwise, because I feel like through my experience as a teacher and seeing all of my kids and their outcomes, I feel like the real growth has happened when the kids have been exposed and have been doing each element of literacy, right? Neglecting one element can show in many ways in literacy. So I just feel like if all elements are there in the week, I think it's optimal level growth. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for adding that, Nikla, and for Aparna and Riddhi for sharing. We're absolutely on the dot, but I'm really, really grateful that you shared your learning with all of us here today, including me. I'm taking away so much. But yeah, with that, Anu, over to you.